They called him the coldest CEO in the city, a man who had everything: money, power, influence, but nothing could melt the frost that covered his heart. Alexander Gray was known for being ruthless in business and even harsher when it came to matters of trust. People whispered that love was just a weakness he could never afford. But fate had its own way of weaving irony, and it came in the form of a marriage arranged by his family. On the day of his wedding, as he stood in front of hundreds of guests, Alexander's jaw tightened when he looked at the veiled bride. Rumors had already reached his ears. She was plain, unattractive, and someone far below his standards. He thought it was a cruel trick, an arrangement forced upon him to secure family alliances. He planned to end it quickly, to humiliate her before she humiliated him. But when the moment came to lift the veil, everything he thought he knew about her, about himself, and about love, began to unravel in ways no one could have expected. The bride's name was Isabella. She walked down the aisle with slow, quiet steps, her head bowed, hands trembling as the weight of judgment pressed heavily against her. The guests exchanged whispers, mocking her appearance beneath the thick veil. Some even laughed softly, convinced this union would be the greatest scandal the wealthy CEO had ever endured. Isabella had heard the cruel remarks long before this day. They called her unworthy, ordinary, even ugly, but she had learned to live with their words. What no one knew was that beneath the veil was not only a face of breathtaking beauty but also a story carved by pain, resilience, and hidden strength. Alexander's eyes narrowed. To him, this wasn't just a wedding, it was a trap. He believed his grandfather had orchestrated it to soften him, to bind him to a woman who could never meet his standards. He whispered to himself that after the ceremony, he would make sure she understood her place, far away from his life and his empire. The vows passed in a blur, his voice firm and cold as ice. Isabella's voice, however, was soft yet steady, carrying a strength that made him glance at her more than once. He wondered how she could sound so composed when her world was clearly mocking her. When the priest finally declared them husband and wife, Alexander reached out, ready to lift the veil with disdain. His intention was simple: to expose her, to confirm what he already believed, and to harden his resolve. But as the veil rose and her face was revealed, silence fell across the room. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Isabella's features were luminous, eyes deep and soulful, skin radiant, lips trembling not from fear but from the courage it took to stand there. She was not ugly. She was, in fact, stunning in a way that made beauty seem small compared to the depth of her presence. For the first time in years, Alexander's cold expression faltered. His hand lingered in the air, frozen between disbelief and awe. He had prepared himself to despise her, but the reality before him made his chest tighten in a way he could not understand. The mocking laughter of the crowd turned into murmurs of shame, yet Isabella did not look at them. She looked at Alexander, her new husband, with eyes that carried no hate, only quiet dignity. That look pierced deeper than any words ever could. Their life together after the wedding was far from easy. Alexander struggled to trust her, convinced that her beauty hid some manipulation, some hidden agenda. His pride clashed with her silence, his coldness against her warmth. At times, he would lash out, testing her patience, trying to find the flaw he believed must exist. But Isabella carried herself with grace, tending to his grandfather with kindness, respecting the household staff, and showing compassion where Alexander showed none. Slowly, the walls around his heart began to tremble, though he fought desperately to keep them intact. One evening, Alexander overheard a conversation he was never meant to hear. Isabella was speaking softly to his grandfather, confessing that she had never cared for wealth or status, that she agreed to the marriage only because she promised her late parents she would honor their wishes. Her words were not about ambition but sacrifice, not about taking but giving. "I know he doesn't love me," she whispered, "but I will stand by him. Even if he never sees me, I will not break my vow." Those words struck Alexander harder than any betrayal ever had. That night, as he watched her tend to the old man with gentle hands, he felt something shift inside him. For the first time, he wondered if he had been blind not to her face, but to her heart. The challenges did not end there. The world outside continued to sneer, jealous rivals tried to ruin their marriage, and Alexander's own fears of vulnerability threatened to destroy what was slowly blooming between them. But Isabella's quiet strength never wavered. She faced humiliation, gossip, and even Alexander's cold silences with a patience that came from love deeper than pride. And then came the moment of truth. A business deal went disastrously wrong, and Alexander found himself abandoned by those who once praised him. Betrayed, cornered, and vulnerable for the first time, he expected Isabella to turn her back as well. Instead, she stood beside him, fighting for his name, protecting his family's legacy with everything she had. When the storm passed and Alexander emerged not as the cold CEO but as a man humbled by love, he finally understood what his grandfather had seen all along, that true beauty had never been about appearances but about a heart willing to give without condition. Holding Isabella's hands one evening, his voice broke for the first time in years. "I thought I was tricked into this marriage," he whispered, his eyes glistening. "But the truth is, you've given me more than I ever deserved. You've shown me love I didn't believe existed." Isabella smiled, her eyes shining with quiet tears. "You weren't tricked, Alexander. You were saved." From that day on, the cold CEO was never the same. The man who once built walls around his heart now built bridges with the woman who had taught him the meaning of love. And as people looked at them, they no longer whispered about a cruel trick or an ugly bride. They spoke of a love story that proved that true beauty and strength of character would always outshine shallow judgment. The CEO who once thought he had been deceived discovered instead that he had been blessed with the greatest truth of all. That love, when pure, can change even the hardest heart. And that moment, when he lifted the veil, had not been the beginning of shame but the start of a forever he never expected.